Devin Haney has received a lot of criticism since his comeback fight last weekend against Jose Ramirez, particularly online. Devin took a year off following his defeat to Ryan Garcia, which I personally believe was the right call, but it did have an impact on his performance. The fight was really poor, and this is reflected in the punch stats. In the entire fight, Devin landed 70 out of 224 punches at a 31.3% land percentage, and Ramirez just 40 out of 279 at 14.3% landed percentage. For comparison, when Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. fought, Benn landed 215 out of 593 punches at a 36.3 connected ratio, and Eubank Jr. landed 367 out of 912 punches at a 40.2% connect ratio. I think this comparison added hugely to why the whole Times Square card was so poorly received.
Following such a legendary fight that showcased what boxing is about in terms of character and determination. As a result, Haney has been labelled as a runner, and it is true on this occasion he hardly held his feet at all and looked very jittery in his movement. Whilst Haney certainly isn't blameless for the poor quality of the fight, there may have also been other factors at play. Ramirez was really poor as well, more so than Haney in my opinion, and this has become a bit of a theme. In his fight with Barboza, it was a similar story, with Ramirez following his opponent but never really cutting off the ring and letting his hands go. There's a fair argument to say that Ramirez hasn't been the same since the Josh Taylor fight back in 2020. I think the event as a whole also had an impact too. As much as a spectacle as Times Square was, it was a muted atmosphere which may have contributed to the flat performances, similar to what we saw in lockdown, as these fighters thrive off of the noise of the packed arena. And the fact remains that after a year out, Haney pitched a 12-0 shutout. The effects of the Garcia fight are undoubtedly still there. Clearly his confidence has been knocked in the ring, as he was reluctant to take any risks at all, which makes you wonder if he has lost some belief in his ability to take a punch. But this is only natural and to be expected. He endured 3 really heavy knockdowns in the Garcia fight. He showed real bravery to keep getting up, but of course this has had a knock-on effect. Caution is no bad thing in boxing, but of course there is a balance to be had with risk. I've seen comparisons to the effect that the Ruiz loss had on Anthony Joshua, but it's important to note that the narrative around the fighter can change in an instant. 1 second you're overcautious, the next you're on top of the world, and the next you're back at square one. In reality, none of this is necessarily correct, and the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Contrary to popular belief, Haney at his best is no runner. He boxes off the back foot, yes, but uses great anticipation in his defense, having thrown a punch to immediately perform a defensive maneuver. This keeps him in range for a follow-up attack, unlike the Ramirez fight where he's predominantly used footwork and therefore wasn't often in range to punch. It's easy to write a fighter off after a few bad performances, however it's important to look at what Haney has already achieved. Haney's record is stacked already despite him only being 26 years old. His best wins to date in my opinion are Jose Ramirez, 2 wins on away turf versus George Kambosos, who was undefeated and coming off the back of a win versus Teofimo Lopez, Vasyl Lomachenko and Regis Prograis. Linares was really his breakthrough performance, as he had to come through adversity, but still managed to really showcase his skills, particularly defensively, pulling off a range of pulls, rolls and slips in order to avoid punches by the slimmest of margins. Haney became and retained the undisputed lightweight title over 2 fights in Australia versus George Kambosos. It was really the perfect style for Haney, employing his superior reach to make Kambosos overreach and punish him with counter right hands. Against Loma, Haney shocked many by employing tactics that shorter fighters would usually use, often employing the double jab followed by a right hand to the body. I don't believe Loma expected this, and despite the fight being very close, you can't deny it was an excellent performance by Haney. And to date so far, I believe Haney's best performance came in his 140 pounds debut versus Regis Prograis, where he put everything he had been working on to use with a little more power on his punches at the higher weight, making Prograis pay for overreaching and then employing brilliant proactive defence. This is reflected in the punch stats across the 5 fights mentioned. Against Linares, Haney landed 215 out of 675 punches at a 31.9% connect ratio. Against Kambosos, it was 147 out of 588 at 25%, and 202 out of 487, 41% in the rematch. Against Loma, it was 110 out of 405, 27.2%, and against Prograis, it was 129 out of 367 at 35.1%. Over time, you can see a reduction in the amount of punches thrown, although this is likely due to a mixture of increasing in weight, fighting higher quality opponents, and attempting to land more accurate, effective punches. Compare this with the Ramirez fight where Haney threw only 224 punches. The numbers are night and day. So in conclusion, Haney is in the middle of a rebuild after a big setback versus Ryan Garcia. I believe he needs time for this, and one big win with a good performance, and the entire narrative around him can change in an instant. Still only 26 years old, there's more than enough time for Haney to put this part of his career behind him and move on.